In my real life and in comments, I've gotten questions about climate change along the lines of, CO2 is good for plants. Won't they grow more and even out the added CO2? Or the somewhat related, why can't we just plant more trees? And I've given answers and I know the underlying problems, but these issues deal with incredibly large numbers, and I want to work through this problem in my own way, which is in Minecraft and making a video, I guess. This will help me visualize the scale of the issue and maybe help some others as well. So let's look at the scale of climate change. To give you some background, 90% of the coal that has ever existed was created during the 60 million years of the Carboniferous. Large plants were new on the scene, and continents were near the equator coming together to form Pangaea. These warm areas were perfect for tropical forests, and young mountains like the Appalachians were providing tons of sediment to bury these trees where they fell before they could start to rot. The perfect environment to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and form coal. This reduction in CO2 levels brought the world into an ice age that lasted until the end of the Carboniferous. Presently, we have burned about half of all coal ever made, releasing what took 30 million years of Earth's most productive period to sequester back into the atmosphere in just 150 years. At our scale here, where one block equals 1 million years, a line 150 years thick is barely visible. But in reality, most of the coal has been burnt in just the last 40 years. Last year, we mined the most coal ever in history, 8.7 billion tons. This would create a cube 1,872 meters on a side. Coal is the largest single contributor to CO2 emissions, but it's still less than half of the total. Besides these other large sources, we're going to be dealing with total historic volumes. So this is actually one of the smaller values we'll be working with. To start, we are going to adjust our scale by 1/1000th. Besides coal, we are also using other carbon that was sequestered during other time periods. Nearly all the petroleum we use comes from the Mesozoic, the age of dinosaurs. No, oil is not dead dinosaurs. It's mostly marine microorganisms that lived at the same time. Last year, we extracted 107 million barrels of oil a day. Almost 40 trillion barrels in total for the year. Once again, the most ever. We also extract natural gas originating from a variety of times throughout Earth's history. About 4.25 trillion cubic meters last year. Natural gas is primarily methane, and since gas is much less dense, its volume is much greater, even though its overall CO2 contribution is less than the others. This is one of the issues talking about this, because everything has different units. Coal is by weight, usually in millions of tons. Oil is in barrels, which people don't have a good understanding of how big a barrel is. It's 42 gallons, or 159 liters. Gas is often measured in standard cubic meters, and the remaining sources we will talk about are reported as a volume or weight of gas. So let's get through them, and then we can convert everything into some more comparable units. During the creation of cement, we need to make lime, and this is done through burning limestone. It breaks down into lime, which is calcium oxide, and CO2. This is essentially what I did in the Smooth Rock episode. In 2024, cement manufacturing produced 1.4 billion tons of CO2. A common practice in oil production and other industries is flaring, or just burning unwanted gases. This is often natural gas that, for whatever reason, is too much trouble to do something else with, so it's just burnt. About 148 billion cubic meters of gas were flared last year. And the last large source is an aggregate of other industrial processes. CO2 is used and released in a wide range of industries, and that is all just put together into one category here. In total, last year, there was about 425 million tons of CO2 released from these processes. Now let's convert these into something easier to deal with. I often see these converted into CO2, since that's ultimately the problem. But instead, I'm going to convert them into just carbon, and one block will equal 1 gigaton of carbon. A gigaton is equal to 1 trillion kilograms. And to help keep that in perspective, the Great Pyramid of Giza weighs about 6 million tons, which is 0.006 gigatons. This is truly a huge value. For coal, we mined 6.8 gigatons last year, or over 1,100 Great Pyramids. we can convert the rest and now actually have a better visual of ratios. And before we move on to cumulative values, let's look at some natural sources. It's something that gets brought up in discussions, and I didn't know how it would actually compare. 2021 was a record year for fires globally. An estimated 1.8 billion tons of CO2 was produced, or almost 0.5 gigatons of carbon, or just a little bit more than the cement industry does every year. Volcanoes are another natural source of CO2, and they tend to be pretty consistent with the volumes of eruptions over time. And in 2021, they contributed an estimated 0.12 gigatons carbon. Annual human CO2 production was 14 gigatons, 23 times greater than all the fires and volcanoes combined. Which might be surprising. I didn't think it would be that far apart. But humans outpace nature in many things now. In 2015, a conservative estimate of human-produced sediment was 316 gigatons, which is more than 24 times the amount of sediment delivered to the ocean by all the rivers in the world. We are actually the primary means of Earth movement on the planet, more than natural geologic processes. Let's move on to the cumulative values for CO2 emissions. We have data going back to 1750 for coal use, and the cumulative value is about 232 gigatons of carbon. We don't need to talk about each of the other values, but their relative orders still say the same. In total, all human-produced CO2 adds up to a little over 500 gigatons of carbon added to the atmosphere. Pre-industrial atmospheric carbon totaled about 600 gigatons carbon. So we have nearly doubled the original, but presently the total carbon in the atmosphere is only 900 gigatons carbon. Still huge, but missing 200 gigatons if you just added the two up. So now let's shift to carbon sinks, or places where carbon just hangs out. Coal is a carbon sink if it's left where it was, and the largest sink is rocks. Carbonate rocks, like limestone, have a base of, carbonate, 1 carbon and 3 oxygen, but many rocks have carbon in them. Even a silicate igneous rock like granite usually is about 0.5% carbon, which isn't a lot, but there is an insane amount of granite. In total, crustal rocks are estimated to contain about 122 million gigatons of carbon. That's 122 petatons. This is almost just the background level. It's very stable. Rocks do weather and give off CO2, but they are also created, taking some out of the atmosphere. The carbonate rocks that do form in the ocean, the second largest sink. Near the surface, about 900 gigatons of carbon is dissolved and used by organisms to make shells. When they die, that carbon is taken down as sediment into the deep. These deep sediments sequester a huge 37,000 gigatons of carbon. Our missing 200 gigatons from earlier is mostly in the shallow ocean, and given time, it might cycle down into the deep, but not on the timescales we are dealing with. By dissolving CO2, the ocean's acidity is increasing, and this much of it causes issues for the organisms that make shells, and at some point, they can't and will go extinct. So now let's get back to the original question. Why can't we plant more trees? The terrestrial carbon sinks include soils containing 2,500 gigatons and permafrost containing 1,600. The carbon in them is primarily old organic matter that hasn't fully decomposed, which originally came from plants. Living plants make up about 450 gigatons of carbon. The smallest sink here, but still a massive number. For reference, every animal on Earth is about 2.6 gigatons carbon, and humans are about 0.06 of that. Plants can grow faster and larger with more CO2, but usually CO2 is not the limiting component of growth. It's some other nutrient, often nitrogen. Just looking at the values, we have released about 500 gigatons into the atmosphere, and total plants are 450 gigatons. So we would basically have to double the total amount of plants on the planet to get back to where we started. But there just isn't enough nutrients to do that, and there are other complications. About 300 gigatons of it is wood. The exterior part of a tree is the only living part. The interior heartwood from previous growth is dead, and that growth takes time. So we have to plant and care for trees for, let's say, 40 years. Different trees live longer than others, but that's a decent value. If we did this and everything goes well, in 40 years, we have doubled the plants on Earth. But if we didn't change our carbon use, and projecting from what we used last year, we would have put another 560 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere during that time. So Planting more trees would definitely help, but it won't solve the problem. And even maintaining the current CO2 values is an issue. You aren't immediately warm the moment you put a blanket on. It takes time to build up. And the same is happening to our planet, even if we don't produce any more CO2. And besides, if anything, we are going the opposite direction with plants. I haven't talked about land use changes. We are doing a lot of deforestation and destroying wetlands and peatlands, which are part of these larger carbon sinks. In the natural world, this process takes a long time. Like I said earlier, in the Carboniferous, this process took 30 million years to sequester the coal we have used. But humans are now the dominant geologic force on the planet, and we can affect change much quicker. For bad, but maybe also for good. We know what causes this problem. We know how to make it better. We just need to do it. And on some level, I can't blame companies for these issues. They did cover up years of research and dumped billions of dollars into lobbying governments. But if you expect a company to make decisions that will not benefit them and give them more profit, then you are delusional. There might be some ethical companies, but it's because they have ethical people. But sadly, competition from companies with non-ethical people will tend to outcompete or push ethical people to bend rules and change laws. This change can only come from governments, by making laws, regulations, and improving the populace's lives and future. You know, the reason they exist in the first place. Governments need to inconvenience some people for the greater good, not just for the good of a few shareholders. I didn't make this video to be a downer, but honestly, just because I wanted to see these relationships to help me understand the magnitude and didn't know what this episode was going to be when I started. It was originally just going to be a short looking at total plant volumes compared to total CO2 emissions, and it became interesting enough to talk about it a bit more. I hope this helps others with understanding, and I definitely didn't cover everything here. And by all means, if I got anything wrong, let me know. If you have questions, ask. I normally don't do follow-up episodes for these shorter videos, but if there is enough interest and questions, I might make one over on the second channel. The next video on this channel will be something lighter, I promise. I hope everyone has a nice day, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.
Do I have an office?
No, you don't have an office.
I wish I did. I wish I did so I can touch those.
Mm-hmm.
Dada, when I'm grown up, can I touch those?
Don't have your hands in there. Yes, when you're older, you can touch those.